Dana Dunford joins me, and you can learn what her team is up to by heading over to hemlane.com. That's hemlane.com. If you are managing your properties, this is where you're going to want to start. Head over to hemlane.com because it is a platform that helps entrepreneurs manage their properties. So, really appreciate your time here today, Dana.
Great.
Well, I warned you before we hit record that we're going to do kind of a truncated version of how you found your way into this because I know that you have quite the tech background. You were at Apple and Nest for a time, and then you found your way into self-managing real estate.
That's correct. With really kind of this, if we want to not talk too much about my background, realizing that I wasn't the only one out there. Jack, you're an example of someone who self manages their real estate. 72% of investors self manage their real estate. So most real estate investors or folks who own residential real estate are self managing. And so, really, the question is, how do you make that better? And for me personally, it was my husband and I have investments out of state. And so we don't live where our properties are, but still wanting to self-manage. We'd gone the route of traditional management and had realized no one cares about your property as much as you. And so it was easier for us to manage, but we weren't on the ground. And so the question was like, how do you manage and provide a solution that is an alternative to traditional management? It works that way, but you can still self-manage and take the reins. And so that was really important to me. I believe that just software does not solve people's problems. You actually need some sort of network and platform that connects humans together, and that solves problems. And so really kind of looking at it from the lens of saying, I'm not the only one out there doing this. Purchasing real estate within itself is a beast and actually more challenging than I had expected. But then from there, you have 10 plus years of managing this property. And typically things go right, but how do you mitigate risk to ensure that it does go right more often than not has been mitigated? Everything from how you set up your property to what tenants you select for the property to the day to day operations and setting the right expectations.
So, I've talked to a number of, I use a platform myself to self-manage these properties. And in the end, I had the exact same experience that you kind of laid out. And when you do engage a property manager, I'm sure a lot of people have had different experiences, but for the most part, I have yet to be able to find a property manager where our interests are aligned. They're usually trying to make their payroll and trying to find work for their handyman and whatever else. It just hasn't typically worked out.
Yeah, and another thing with it, and this is not the fault of the property managers, but the pricing is completely messed up. Like they make more money on the turnover, or they make the same amount on a turnover as they make in a full year of having a tenant in the property. So for them, a turnover is not necessarily a bad thing, versus for you as a real estate investor, you're losing that rent, you're paying up to 1 month's rent in turnover costs. And so there's certain things like that. Other examples I've seen is what you had mentioned about they're running their own business. So they're looking to increase that bottom line. And an example would be like vendor up charges. Every time they send a vendor out, they can add in a lot of these systems like Appfolio and Yardi, they can go ahead and add like a 5 to I've seen up to 20% charge for maintenance and repair. And so for us, it was really important to say there's no upcharges. We're aligned to reduce that cost associated with sending out a service professional. Whatever invoice you get from them is invoice you see. We don't take a cut from them. We don't take a cut from you. And so I totally agree that there's been all of these added charges that are actually hurtful for you as the real estate investor and rental owner. And so how do you make sure to align those incentives? I do think the best traditional managers out there have started to do, flat rates, no vendor up charges, but it's very rare to find. I think a lot of the consulting groups that train property managers train them to nickel and dime and all these additional fees.
So it was Hemlane originally developed to kind of fulfill a need that you were personally experiencing?
Yeah, yeah, so I well, and my co-founder and I always have these, like, ambitious goals. So, when I think about innovation, I think about how do you take something so extreme, and then that's your vision. That's where you're getting in, like, 5 to 10 years, and then how do you slowly get there every year? And so for me, it's how do you manage your properties from Mars, right? How do you go to Mars and you can manage everything going on the ground here? Part of the vision I had already seen from tech companies I had worked at. So, for example, I was working at Nest and I could see everything in my primary home from my camera. I'm not at home right now, but I can go on there and I can change my thermostat temperature. I can see who's walking in and out of the front door. And so, not to be creepy because tenants don't want you to have that.
Mhm.
But how do you know what's going on? Like, how do you know if the hot water heater is about to go out before it happens? How do you know when tenants are viewing the property, the chances of them submitting an application? And so really kind of taking what I learned that was happening other places in tech and saying, why is rental management still like built back in like, the 1920s? It kind of feels like that. How do you take that and bring it to an extreme of saying you could manage this property from everywhere and never see it? And that was a personal goal of mine of when I purchase real estate, I don't see the properties and I can manage them all from Hemlane without seeing them. Some of our investors, though, they live down the street. They house hack. They live in the property next door. And so it was really important to provide a flexible model, saying it's a plug and play. You can pick and choose what services you want. You can pick and choose what software you want, all of that throughout the process. So that was really important to us. But I do think if you come to an extreme of saying, "Hey, everyone lives on Mars and they need to manage their properties," then realistically, every single month and every single year, you look and you just add more and you're like, "Oh, wow, we're doing more for a real estate investor." And now a lot of our investors, they live overseas. They live in these countries you've never heard of. They live in these countries like, Singapore, London, etc., and they're managing their US real estate from there. And what's interesting about it is they feel like they know more about what's going on because everything's 100% transparent to them than they would if they otherwise had a traditional manager.
Well, we could go down a variety of roads here. Let's start things off by talking about the experience an investor would have, because you've mentioned a number of times now doing some distance investing on this platform and doing it yourself. You're bringing up a kind of a new concept to a lot of people. I think everybody has this
Yeah.
idea that they would like to invest out of state. Like I have people from California all the time who just want to buy things in Indianapolis, for example. But could you break down like that experience, how this would work? Like in fact, why don't we start with vetting a applicant to maintenance? Like let's just talk about the experience they might have.
Yeah, great question. And you're right. The best investments are not in your backyard always. They could be, but you don't want to be limited to just say, I can only invest here. It's like in the stock market saying, I can only invest in the companies that are in my city. That's crazy to me. Like you should be able to invest in any. And so I think from that perspective, when you look at our experience, it starts with finding and placing a tenant. So there's two different ways to do that. The first is saying you do it yourself. If the property is down the street from where you live, you can go ahead and manage your property and go show it and advertise it and do everything yourself. The other option is saying, I don't live there, or I live there, but I don't have time to do it. And in that particular case, what you'll find that we do is we'll give you two options. You can either use self-guided tours, or the other alternative that you can use is a local leasing agent. And we'll give you a list of all of them, and they can go out and show your property. So I think this whole concept of self-management, it's a little bit misconstrued because what you'll see happen is folks will say, I have to physically be there to self-manage. You don't, but you do need boots on the ground. Even if you're doing self-guided tours, you still have an inspector out there to inspect the property. You still have someone to put the digital lockbox on with codes that shift every single time. We are still screening the tenants and getting their ID up to their face to scan them to say, is this who they say they are when they go into the showing, and follow up with them on a phone call while they're there. And so I think that is the first part of breaking it down. Then the second part is going through and really knowing your tenants. So let's just say you did a self guided tour, you never met the tenants. We give you that option, Jack, afterwards of saying, hey, do you want to yourself do a Zoom with them and meet with them face to face before they move in? These are the tenants who have objectively qualified for the property, following fair housing. Do you yourself want to meet with them? And so I think all of that is really important, and making sure you yourself feel very comfortable with who is going to be in your property and feeling like you're self managing, but you could do it from millions of miles away. So that's the first one in finding placing a tenant. We also have the best technology for it. I know there's a lot of platforms out there. We advertise to all of them. We do Zillow, rent.com. We do over 15 of the top quality websites. And so you just click a button, it lists it everywhere, and it's going to qualify the tenants, set up the showings, all of that. And the real question, Jack, is do you want to show your property yourself, or do you want to use our self guided tours, or do you want to use a local leasing agent? So we have all of those options. Then from there, you ask about maintenance. Maintenance is one of my favorite. It's our first tech enabled service that we built. It's our largest team, and you have someone 24/7 who's your dedicated coordinator. If your coordinator, by the way, they don't work 24/7. So if they're not in the office, you have a substitute coordinator in there, but they are basically the ones who are going to go ahead and pick up the phone, troubleshoot the repair request, dispatch the service professionals, and everything end to end for you. And so, from that perspective, you have a coordinator who basically acts as that professional, and they're trained in repair coordination. So, everything from, how do I troubleshoot a dishwasher not working to my HVAC's not working? They'll be able to go through that process for you when you need them.
So that coordinator then reaches out to somebody local. They probably have a list of plumbers, electricians, whatever, to coordinate with the tenant, do all of that for you?
Exactly. And the best part about it, Jack, is you can use your own maintenance network, or you can tap into ours and select who you want from there. There are certain areas, Jack, like let's just say I know you're in North Dakota. There's probably quite a few towns in North Dakota where we will tell you, Jack, we don't have any service professionals here. We can call them, but you give us who your handyman is, your general contractor, your plumber, your electrician. You can give us some backups and we'll call them for you so you can be out of the day to day. We can even pay, and you can give us authorization from your bank account to have single use credit cards that track to that bank account, and we can go ahead and pay them out. The reason to use single use credit cards is then your bank information isn't compromised. So we can go ahead and do all of that for you. So that's one option. The other option with it is for you to just tap into our network. And if you tap into our network, then these are people who are licensed and insured for their trade. You'll see their prices. Whatever they're charging is what you will be charged. And we can go ahead and go through the entire coordination for you.
Just to remind everybody, head over to hemlane.com to check this out. I went onto your site. There even looks like there's a free trial period so people can kick the tires a little bit. So that's definitely something worth checking out. Hemlane.com. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor. Share this with one of your investor friends. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. So you mentioned the code, the equipment to get into an apartment. Is there any additional hardware or anything that you typically recommend people invest in to take advantage of your platform?
Yeah, on the hardware side, no, we try to keep it at a very much of a minimum and have eyes on the ground instead. So if you want a process server to just drive by your property, if you want an inspector, we try to use humans. The reason is if you say like, "Hey, I'm going to put security cameras in the place," tenants are going when they move in are going to be like, "What the heck? Why are you putting security cameras into the house? This is an invasion of my privacy." And so, no, we try to use the least amount of hardware possible. And the other thing that and why I'm a huge fan of self-guided tours, and I could talk about it for days because I used to say this is a recipe for disaster and squatters. And now when I look at the numbers and at least our own personal experience, because we run a really tight ship, it's like, wow, it places a tenant faster. You're doing showing 7 days of the week. And because you're doing showing 7 days of the week, as long as you're priced correctly, you're gonna get a tenant in really quickly and be able to just cycle through and have coordinators on the call, setting things up, making sure that you don't have that vacancy. You reduce your risk of a squatter because you have fewer days of the property being vacant. There's always some sort of eyes on the property. But no, we try to use limited amount of hardware, and the more hardware that we've A/B tested, we've tested it to say like, "Hey, does putting in more security or more hardware actually help?" It actually is just an extra cost for an owner and also doesn't provide the returns.
Some of the ideas that you've suggested it makes me smile a little bit because it validates some of the things that I've fallen into myself. I mentioned that I manage some of our rentals, and in one case, I have done what you've suggested, but just kind of fallen into it. The Wi-Fi security locks on the front and the back door of the building was something I added this year so I could issue a temporary code for those people, every resident now I can advertise it as a secured building. I do have blink cameras on the front and back door, but for different reasons than what you've said. In our neck of the woods, we have a lot of snow, so it allows me
Mhm.
to check the sidewalks and make sure that those things are being cleared on a regular basis. So I don't have to drive an hour
Yeah.
one direction in order to check these things out. These blink cameras are on batteries. So when I do have a vacant unit, I move that blink camera to the vacant unit and I allow them to go tour it themselves just by giving them that temporary code to the building. Some of the stuff that you're suggesting really works and has helped me a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where, like, one size doesn't fit all, to your point. You have to test what like, the Wi-Fi is a really interesting one because we tested Wi-Fi so that we had full remote access to all these properties to know what's going on. Because Bluetooth doesn't quite get you there. You need a
Right.
phone or something to get the Bluetooth to register, and what we heard from a lot of our owners, because we talk to them every day, was like, "Hey, this is too expensive for us," even though it's, it's $7 a month or something, especially those with single family homes. And so there's always that balance of like what works for you. And to your point, the most valuable thing as a real estate investor and owner is your time. And so if
Mhm.
you can argue your time is worth more than $7 every 30 minutes or hour. And so as long as you can justify that, putting this type of technology and I think to your point is great. And it's only going to get better because of companies like Starlink and other sort of really fast Wi-Fi, cut the cost, et cetera, being able to be fully connected. You kind of see the future going that direction, which I think is very, very exciting.
Yeah. You mentioned networking, and then you also mentioned networking associated with the maintenance. Does your platform help with some of those, like, talk to locating and identifying those boots on the ground that you might need to get some of this done?
Yeah, so we started building up our boots on the ground in 2015. And so, for kind of as a rule of thumb, anywhere with a population, and this is like MSA within a radius, over 100,000 will be able to service the property with the boots on the ground. And us building up the network, it's been through various different channels and avenues. So our agents are a big source of it. So the agents we work with, the property management partners we work with will help refer these. But these folks aren't on our payroll. So to your point, we're not trying to send them out to just like be able to pay their salary. It's only when obviously there's a problem, a repair that needs to happen, or there's been an inspection and certain things need to be done that we would send them out. And so we built up our network that way. However, and then we also have commercial partners with it. However, we're constantly cycling through that list and saying who are the best performers out there. The ones that are the most challenging are handyman. And the reason handymen are the most challenging, one, they're not licensed, right? They're insured. We make sure they're insured, but they're not licensed for their trade. And so the reason that I bring that up that's important is a lot of times these folks one day wake up and say, I'm going to become a handyman. And being able to see how they perform and then how they perform consistently over time is very important. And we've had certain cases, like, for example, a handyman who's just amazing and is so great. Their price is right. They delight customers. Everyone's giving them five-star reviews in the system. And then a tenant that we've sent the handyman out to, gives a 1 star or 2 star, and we call them, and they're like, they didn't show up. And we find out, like, oh, okay, we'll dispatch someone else if we can't get a hold of them right away. But we find out that they're an alcoholic or something, and they suddenly something changed and they no longer perform at the same level that they used to. The reason I say handyman are the ones we change out the most is because they're usually one-man shops. In the
Mhm.
plumbing, we kinda look for plumbing and HVAC and all of that. We look for someone who's been in the business, 25 years, small mom and or so it's like, son and father shop. Like, those usually tend to be the best because we know who's going out. They're a maybe five-person team max, and we can feel like we really trust them. Handymen, because usually they're individual, and any of these larger handyman shops technically aren't, a lot of times the best. That's where we sometimes have to cycle out and test new people to make sure our market always has really good individuals that we're repeatedly sending out. And then also, obviously, handymen can only do small jobs that don't require a license. So we rely on our general contractors as well as our networks of plumbers, electricians, HVAC to do everything else.
So one of the things that I was hoping we can touch on as well is the finances of the property and how it's performing. Does your platform provide any kind of reports or insights on that piece of it? I think that is kind of a blind spot for a number of investors.
Yeah, and what's interesting is a lot of investors, this was really shocking in customer discovery. They don't actually understand financial reports. They just don't know. And it's not their fault. They just don't have a degree in accounting. And so we not only have a free trial, we also have a free plan. The free plan is to help you find and place a tenant. It also helps with all that accounting. So you can go ahead and do a bank sync with us, add your bank accounts, and then what will happen is we'll go ahead and populate all the transactions. Our system learns if you're doing rent collection through us or any sort of transaction like maintenance and repair goes through us, it will automatically be tagged with the invoice uploaded. You don't have to do any of that. So it's very hands off. But you'll be able to go ahead and record your transactions, and then we populate those reports for you so you can see the performance of your property.
Sure. I appreciate that insight. You mentioned earlier that our industry, I think this is for realtors as well. We're kind of behind when it comes to technology. Is there anything else that comes to mind that people maybe should consider getting in front of?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One, I love that you brought up realtors. A lot of realtors use us with their clients. That's actually one of our largest growing segments. And then also some property managers use us, which I love because they also will drive by properties for us, be kind of those eyes and ears on the ground, but the owner is fully controlling their properties on there, has that transparency. So we have various different options. And then property managers who grow and scale and are too big and they're like, I need 24/7 repair coordination. I need all this stuff. They love it as well. As far as some of the most beloved features we haven't spoken about, one of them is Eviction Shield. And so Eviction Shield is when your tenant is late on rent. We will automatically have a mediator give your tenant a call. Their goal is not to hassle the tenant to say, "Where's your rent? I'm a debt collector." Their goal is to understand what is happening. What is the likelihood that this tenant is going to pay rent? Are there local church groups? Is there a local government agency that will be able to help pay this month's rent? How do we get that rent paid as quickly as possible? Are their friends and family going to chip in and pay? What does a payment plan look like? And then they also help with the process serving. So if you need to serve a notice, you'll fill out the eviction notice, the 3-day notice or 7-day notice, or whatever your state's or county's requirements are. They'll go ahead and have a process server serve the notice if it gets to that point. And so the goal is to mitigate the risk of this going to court and for you to try to get your money and for us to try to figure out what is the best path forward to make sure that you don't have it's in some places, the tenant's in the property for 6 months and you're looking for a court date. And so that mediation and what it's called eviction shield is a really growing and popular product feature. The other one is a rental assistant. So there's a lot of virtual assistants out there. I'm very much against them. They don't understand fair housing. They don't understand how to speak to tenants and all the structure associated with noise complaints or anything else. And so a rental assistant is one that comes in, follows exactly your in tenancy guide. So how you want us to deal with any of these conflicts, and that rental assistant will be able to respond on your behalf.
Okay. Well, as you can tell, there's a lot to uncover and unwrap here. So again, check out hemlane.com, hemlane.com. See if it's a good fit for you. Take advantage of the free trial or the free tier. You might as well. I'm going to probably sync up my bank account just to see what kind
Yeah.
of financial insights I get out of that. Before we jump into the rapid fire questions, is there a question or concept you wished we would have tried to cover here today?
And what I really want to talk about is where you see property management going. And what I love is that you have such a tech mindset as well with your properties. So, where do you see it going and what do you see as a future in 5 to 10 years?
Oh boy, that's interesting you bring this up because it's a good transition. I haven't announced it yet on this show, so you're kind of forcing my hand. I'm starting another podcast and it's going to be
Okay.
Real Deal Cast. Real Deal is going to focus on giving entrepreneurs more insight on the technology aspect, how to do more in less time by yourself. I think there's going to be more and more people doing what I'm doing, trying to find ways in which to keep something a little closer, something, this concept that real estate is completely passive is, as far as I'm concerned, a smokescreen. It isn't as passive as people have sold it for years. And I think a lot of people, especially when they get into real estate investing, need to understand the tools, processes, and techniques that they can implement to hold on to it themselves for as long as possible before they
Mhm.
decide to scale. And I think there's a lot of importance to that just to understand the business as a whole. So I think there's going to be more of an awakening, if you will, regarding that piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not until you do it that you realize it's not passive. It's a lot of hard work, to your point.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot of hard work, and people who are getting into wholesaling, for example, and I
Mhm.
say that because that's the low hanging fruit. When people get into real estate investing, that's their first, typically their first thing, because you're promised you can get into real estate with no money. They typically have no idea that they need to be making 100 phone calls a day for 30 days to find that one opportunity. Like they need to, there's a lot of effort there that I think is underserved. So that's what I'm going to be doing there. Real Deal Cast. We're going to get into the meat of things. And I'll be talking about how I use blink cameras, how I use slage locks. And then Dana, I don't know if you're up for this, but I'm going to be reviewing platforms such as yours. How is
I
that
love
going to
it.
work? How
Yeah.
does it work? And this is the real world scenario as to how I'm using it and how it's working out.
I think that's great.
So one last time, head over to hemlane.com, hemlane.com. Learn more about this platform. It sounds very robust. It's a platform I wish was around when I started because you started on spreadsheets.
Yep.
But if you're ready, we'll jump into the rapid fire questions.
I love it, Jack.
What lie do real estate investors sometimes tell themselves?
You kind of stole mine with your last comment, which I love. It's the get rich quick. And also that they think it's completely passive and there's no hard work, especially at the beginning when you're setting up your processes, your tools, your system, your spreadsheets for, what properties you want are good purchases versus not, how not to get screwed. It's really interesting. I found real estate has some of the biggest fraud and fraudsters out there. And then social media does not do it any justice because you get these people out there who are influencers who are like, look at my hotel, look at my, new rental properties, and I make $20,000 in 2 years. And You call a lot of BS on some of these. It is a lot of hard
Mhm.
work and it's patience. And I wish people knew that you can have this passive income over time that you build up, but there's still so much work that goes into it.
Yeah, I can't agree more. The influencers are just the bane of my existence. You have these people who can go to any entrepreneur enterprise rent a car and get whatever fancy car and then make it look like they're successful in something. Like it's
Exactly.
if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, there's a lot, but the first would have been to buy Bitcoin and real estate in 2009. I graduated from college in 2008 and I didn't put enough into real estate. And I put some money into some silly stocks, but it would have been Bitcoin and real estate back then.
I wish I would have bought Bitcoin when I first learned about it. It was pennies at the time. And then I've just realized that I would have lost the key or it wouldn't have worked out anyway. I would have been like, I got this USB key in my drawer that I can't access. And that's probably what would have happened.
Yeah, they estimate there's a couple billion of Bitcoin out there that's lost because people have lost the keys.
So, do you have a book recommendation or what are you reading right now?
So I love books. I read a lot of books. The one I'm reading right now, which I think everyone should read, it's probably one of the juiciest books. It's not one that I recommend everyone read, but it's a juicy quick read. It's a true story. It's called Billion Dollar Whale. It's the guy who fooled Hollywood. It's a true story. His name's Joe Low. He fooled Hollywood, Wall Street, and everything and sold billions of dollars and was partying with Paris Hilton and Leonardo DiCaprio. It's actually true. You can look it up, even all the photos online. But the book that I would recommend you read, that's just more of a fun one. The book I do recommend for listeners is 4,000 Weeks. Do you know what 4,000 Weeks is?
No, I haven't heard that one yet.
Okay, it's Oliver Berkman, and 4,000 weeks is the number of weeks an average person lives. I think it's a life management book, and it talks a lot about what's going on we see today with technology and everyone very quickly trying to get everything done, but taking a step back and to think and innovate. And so it's just a really good one for you to kind of think about strategically what you want to do in those 4,000 weeks and then also the impact of certain things you use, such as technology and instant gratification on your life, and how to balance all of that.
And then finally, what single strategy, process, or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time saving impact to you or your business?
So, two, one's personal, one's business. On the business side, it is really strong hiring. So, a really strong team. Never settle for a B player. You need someone who blows you away. And that should be your entire team of everyone that works with you and for you. They should be smarter than you, more driven than you, really pushing the needle and impressing you every day. And if they're not that, then you get into micromanagement, then you have to follow up. And so I think it's really hiring and those people around you just finding those A plus players. For us to do it, we interview over 100 people for every position minimum and hire just one. Then for myself personally is Boomerang for task management. Everyone should download it for Gmail. It's such a lifesaver. So in other words, like let's just say Jack, I send you an email and I'm like, Jack, when's a good time to record this podcast? I can click a button that says remind me in 1 week or 2 weeks if Jack doesn't respond. And then it takes it out of my inbox and pops it back to the top if you don't respond to me. And so it's a great way just to make sure everything moves forward and that everything that you've sent out for others gets done and actioned. I love Boomerang. And it's a free tool. I think every month you get 10 free credits for it.
Well, that's a great tip as well. I
Yeah.
really appreciate your time, Dana. This was fantastic. I want to drive everybody to your site again, hemlane.com, hemlane.com. Great place to start, especially if you're doing your own property management, hemlane.com. Thank you so much. It was great to meet you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jack, for having me.